You have now entered a community of impact engineers. Welcome to the BSL Speaks podcast with your host, Brian St. Louis. Here, we forge the path of leadership by empowering young voices and nurturing the wisdom of seasoned pioneers. Join us as we bridge the gap between generations, blending the fresh perspectives of emerging leaders with the tried and true insights of those who've paved the way. Ready to embrace radical empathy and unlock the boundless potential in our youth? This platform is committed to empowering young visionaries and refining our leadership in homes, communities, schools, and workplaces. Our journey is about more than just personal growth. This is about elevating humanity, one inspired leader at a time. Hello, everyone. Really glad to have both Dr. Walter Lanier and Gabriel Velez with us from the Blessed Hub Project. This is a project that is coming out from Milwaukee and from Marquette University. Their vision is that all Black and Latino students in the city of Milwaukee are supported and excel from middle school through post-secondary education, fulfilling stable employment. They have a very strong vision and very strong aims that are looking to make a massive difference within the city of Milwaukee. And thank you both for coming on to our podcast that focuses on youth development, youth leadership, and looking to make a difference within our world. So thank you so much, Dr. Walter. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here. Excited to chat about our initiative, some of the work we're doing.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I always like to start off more so with the people behind the mission, and would like to learn just a little bit from both of you. What was it that prompted you to become the person that we see today that is working towards these kind of missions? And what is it that you're really truly looking to accomplish throughout this work?
So on my bio in different places, if you read my biography, one of the last lines says that I desire to be a liberating force here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so my goal is that our work would be dramatically, significantly impactful here in the city. I'm a Rust Belt kid. I was born in Buffalo, New York, and then lived in Detroit, Michigan, and now Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our organization commissioned a study, and the second one is coming out on the Index of African American Well-Being. And Milwaukee is the most challenging place to be Black in the nation. And then also all those Rust Belt cities. And one of the keys to uplifting people in the cities is education. And so this is a project and a vision and a focus that's been with me for a while. How do we improve our educational ecosystem where so many Black and brown students are already involved and engaged? And if we improve it will be transformational for the city.
I love that. Thank you very much, Dr. Walter, for that. Gabriel.
Yeah, I always love Walter going first because, he's got such a compelling story and a vision that comes from his real lived experience, and mine is a bit different. I grew up in Northeast from New York City. And my kind of experience really before coming to Milwaukee was as a teacher for a while. And so I taught in Harlem in New York City, where I'm from, and then in South America, in Peru and Colombia. And I really went to graduate school because I was interested in, seeing young people in these different contexts and seeing that, they're all kind of the same, but they're all really different. And where they live and the situation and the environment and the systems around them matters. But then there's stuff that they're all dealing with, right? Like they're all trying to figure out a little bit about what's my future going to be when they're, in their teens and trying to see what's next after kind of the K through 12 schooling and negotiating that. And so, when I came to Milwaukee, I was excited to really sort of jump in to try and understand and work with young people in the area and see, how I could support them now in this kind of new role that I was having, moving from kind of a teacher to being in higher education. And Walter and Rob Smith, who's the director of the center that it's under, their really sort of vision on this was one that's rooted in let's look at, some of these things that young people are going through, these challenges of figuring out, how do I get through my K through 12 education? How do I figure out what's next and beyond for me? And how do I live kind of, fulfilling, thriving, safe life? But seeing that within this, broader system, and then also the sort of stark inequities that exist in Milwaukee and have existed over time. And so, it's been enlightening for me these last 5 years. I've tried to really be sort of like open and hear people out and listen to Walter, but many others, to hear about their stories, their experiences, the strengths, the challenges, and all that's going on.
Love that. Thank you for both of those perspectives, because it gives us a good understanding as to why, the work is being done within Bless Hub. Dr. Walter, you made a point here that I don't want to slide over in a sense. You said, if I'm not mistaken, that Milwaukee is one of the most difficult cities to live in for Black people. Can you expound a little bit more about that, just for us to be able to understand as listeners, just so we could get a good grasp as to what is going on exactly in the city?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can expound really well. I'll start with the data. So there's this index of African American well-being that was created by Dr. Mark Levine Center for Economic Development at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and across 30 different data points, looking at the 50 largest cities in the nation, created this index, looked at some education metrics, life metrics, health, employment, income, poverty, childhood resources, and Milwaukee is on the bottom of the list. It's number 50 out of 50 in terms of African American well-being with that index. Not only that, the other cities that I mentioned, Buffalo, Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, are also at the bottom. Now, if you've been in Milwaukee for a while, that will not shock some Milwaukeeans, because, again, regrettably but truthfully, if you Google Milwaukee Black and worst, you're going to see too often a headline that comes up. So there's a organization called 24/7 that regularly does a list. There's another one, I think, Fortune magazine. You'll find WUWN reports on the perennial nature of the challenges of Black Milwaukee. Doubly tragic because back in the, don't quote me exactly, in mid-70s perhaps, Milwaukee used to have the highest quality of life for African Americans in the nation.
Wow.
But it was short-lived. We were late on the migratory path from the South, and right on the heels of hitting that peak was the process of deindustrialization and industry leaving Milwaukee. So it went from being the highest down, sadly, to the lowest, and it has been there for a while in terms of health and well-being for African Americans.
Same thing with Detroit in a sense, right? Because Detroit was at a high point for African Americans for many years, and then it plummeted. I want to say, isn't that in the? I can't remember exactly either, but like in the 80s, same times, right? Yeah.
That's why, and I've been looking at this even longer, the whole Great Lakes area, the Rust Belt area, because I'm from those three cities. It just kind of sticks. And it all has to do with a combination of deindustrialization, but also cities that were highly segregated with a lot of systemic racism. So in each of those cities, on the one hand, there was a level and measure of well-being because of industry, the auto industry or the beer industry or the factories. And then when those declined, that's when those cities plummeted in terms of health and well-being for African Americans.
So how is that affecting the family? How does this affect the youth in society? Because we're going to talk a little bit more about what Bless Hub is doing to make that difference. But help us to get a picture of what this is doing to the individuals who are in those cities right now.
Well, if you look at if you think about three intersections, if you think about education, if you think about employment, if you think about housing and income, and if you don't have reasonably good education, if you do not have stable employment, if you don't have income and housing, It does not take a high level
Yeah, you're
degree
right.
to figure out what the problems are. And so that
Yeah.
has been the case for decades. So even if you read the Levine reports, and he's a colleague of ours, you'll see his reports going back to like the late 90s, bemoaning
Mm.
and lifting up the challenges of the Black community, Black male unemployment, and the distinctives of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so that's one of the key levers is education. Um, and Gabe mentioned Dr. Robert Smith, who's the director of CURTO, uh, Marquette University Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. Dr. Smith and I go back further to when he was at UW Milwaukee, and we were colleagues back then. I was at Milwaukee Area Technical College, and so we were talking about the ecosystem that's made up of Milwaukee Public Schools, Milwaukee Area Technical College, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, because it's a pre-existing ecosystem through which a fair number of Black and brown students flow, but don't necessarily flow well. And so we always were talking about what
Mm.
it would look like if that system was smoother and more visible and more transparent, and more people could see the beginning, middle, and end and next steps. What would that do? How would that decrease graduation rates? How would that decrease dropout rates, rather, increase graduation rates? What would it do to increase matriculation rates at local colleges if the system, the ecosystem, and this is what gave birth to the Blessed Hub, was something that people had a better access and better understanding of and access to. So,
I'll just jump in there, Brian, too, and to say that I love that question, because that's exactly where my mind is at. Is that some of what Walter is describing when we think of the history, the politics, the social parts, things like systemic racism, like that's all invisible, right? And that's like
Mm.
happening. And what people are experiencing, what young people in the schools, in their neighborhoods, right, are these daily lived realities that are created by that. But it's like they talk about fish swimming in water, right? And you don't see the water, you're just sort of immersed in it. And I think we need to be attentive sometimes as researchers. We look at the big picture and we say, hey, there are these inequities, or we look at the history and talk about that, but we're not necessarily deeply embedded in that lived experience. Or, and from my place, I'm a developmental psychologist. Sometimes the psychologists are so deeply embedded in that experience and what's going on for these individuals that they lose sight of these systems, these histories, these politics that are shaping it all. And so we need to really bring those together. And that's some of the work that we're trying to do.
I love that. Why don't we let's jump into this then? So what is the Blessed Hub specifically? What is it looking to make sure it targets, and what would be some? Let's just start from there. Like what for those who are listening, those who want to really understand what this whole concept is. What exactly is the Blessed Hub?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because we often, when I introduce it and give the name, people kind of sit there with a little bit of like, all right, so what are you talking about? And it takes a bit of explanation.
Sure.
So BLESS was actually a great acronym that one of our graduate student research assistants came up with, but it stands for the Black and Latina Ecosystem and Support Transition Hub. And so, Walter described kind of the vision originally was that this was going to be sort of like a hub that was going to have a research basis and then a programming basis. And things have gone a little bit differently, but we still see it as a hub in the sense of what we're trying to capture is what are the supports, what are the resources, and then what are the transitions and experiences for Black and Latina students thinking about this sort of movement from the high school to post-secondary and early career space. And so, we conceive it as an ecosystem because we're talking about all of Milwaukee, we're talking about all of the young people in it, but we're also thinking, as we were just talking about in that last question, their lived experiences, their trajectories, so that kind of finite lived experience on the ground, but then also within this broader system and what's going on. And some of our main projects are trying to capture the ecosystem, and so that's documenting what are all the supports and resources for these young people, and what are their connections, and who are they serving, and how many, and how. And then some of our projects are more focused on that kind of specific. And so we'll collaborate with an organization providing emergency relief funds to students at MATC to look at what's that student experience like? What are they facing challenges with? How's this support helping them? And so it's kind of bridging, again, that broader to that more maybe micro. And then, in that, we're really trying to be sort of humble in what we're doing as an academic institution, right? And realizing, Marquette's a predominantly white institution, and we're coming at this from, an ivory tower. And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, we have some expertise, we got some resources, some stability, but we're here to use that, to offer that, to listen. And so, for instance, when we built out that map, the way we did it was not going on and Google searching, getting maybe some AI tool to pull stuff online or something, No, we went out and we met with all these organizations, and we've had meetings, and we continue to do, because it's relational, it's hearing them, it's listening, rather than saying, we got to figure it out, we got the expertise, let us tell you how we got to solve this.
Dr. Walter, you have anything you want to add to that? Or
I just for fun, I went back to the original visioning document that goes back to 2019, right before the pandemic. And this was a vision that was submitted to the City of Milwaukee's Black Male Achievement Advisory Council. It's a statutorily created entity created by city statute to advance Black boys and men. And so we got some initial funding, and what we described was the creation of a Black and Latino male transition and dual enrollment hub located at Marquette Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. The idea is designed around the premise of equipping a targeted group of Black and Latino boys and men for some of the key transitional moments in their lives, particularly high school to college, high school to job, college to college, and college to job. And then the other note is the transition points are critical, and they also sync up with the My Brother's Keeper metrics, because the city of Milwaukee had a My Brother's Keeper plan. So they aligned with that, and also lined up with what M Cubed current analysis. M Cubed is a collaboration between the three entities I mentioned: Milwaukee Public Schools, Milwaukee Area Technical College, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And so that was what was crafted as the initial vision statement. Also noted that dual enrollment is a maximizer, and it lines up with the agendas of the different parties involved. So it had good architecture from the beginning. It sought to build connectivity with pre-existing institutions and individuals and best practices. Then we hit a lot of a curveball when it went into the pandemic, but we pivoted really well and turned it into an information hub. And then when we came out of the pandemic, continued to cultivate relationships.
I really love how a lot of the work that you do is building those relationships within your community, making sure that you understand what the data points are, and because of that, you have some very strong data as well that we've been able to see from your for instance, the State of Ecosystem 2023, from a lot of the work that you're doing as well. What is the data showing? Like, if there were about one or two major points that are necessary for us to understand, what is the data showing us right now in order for us to get to the place where massive changes can actually happen?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. And it's interesting because as much as we talk about Milwaukee, I think the thing that comes to mind is something a lot of places across the country are facing, and that's just getting kids in school, attendance. Right now, particularly post-pandemic, and then when you look at other factors like mental health going on, right now attendance is a huge concern. And
sorry, are you talking about high school or university level?
High school, yeah. And the reason I say that, I think, is because I think the high school really lays that groundwork, right? In the sense of, if they're not attending high school, it's going to be hard to then get them looped into resources and supports, because schools are often, not always, but they're one of those primary places. Then it's going to be hard to be thinking about what's next for them, right? Because that high school is laying that foundation. And when I say this, I say attendance with real attentiveness to this not being necessarily on these young people, right? It's not about them just choosing to opt out. I think it's about we're creating the conditions that are not supporting them to go there, whether it be not feeling in the class, in the school, that there's a sense of belonging, that they're engaged, that they want them to be there. And then more broadly, that going to high school and getting a degree is not leading to something that they really see as preparing them for what's next. Right. So I think that's, on us as adults, that's on us and these educational institutions, that's on us as a system. But I do think the data showing, they're not, right now, there's struggles with getting them to show up. The the other side to that, I would say too, is mental health. Mental health, I think young people are just screaming that they need supports. They need a different way of us as adults framing it, listening to them, and helping them too, because some of it we've laid that groundwork for. There's a lot of good evidence, for instance, like social media feeds into mental health crises for youth right now, and that's something that we've laid that groundwork for, and we need to help support them in working through that too. So those are the two data points that come to mind, and those are, like I said, those are both beyond Milwaukee, but then they're really rooted as well in Milwaukee. And one of our strengths of our ecosystem is we got some really good people doing some work with elevating youth voice, and some of what they're elevating out of there, and with some recent reports that came out of like Milwaukee Succeeds, is the same thing, that young people are saying it's mental health and having the right supports and resources. It's feeling like we're getting an education that's really preparing us for thriving in life.
But what about the people that are online, or people that we see that speak about, for instance, these weren't issues that we had back in our day, or the mere fact that, we did have some of these issues, but we figured it out, and that these kids need to just have more resilience. What's the counter, in a sense, to that kind of argument? What is it that we need to make sure our youth are having in order for them to be able to succeed? Especially when certain individuals have a certain mindset as to why youth are not succeeding right now.
Yeah, let me just tell you, in higher education, you get a lot of that mindset, right? You get a lot of kind of, particularly, types of professors with certain identities and power and privilege who've maybe been there for a while, and they kind of take that attitude. So I see that, not necessarily just at Marquette. I'm not speaking just to my institution. I think that's true across a lot of higher education. And I think we got to realize it's a different world, right? It's a different world for many reasons. And that's part of it. So, when I talk to social media and, smartphones, that's something, I'm not that old, and that's not something I grew up with. So when I was,
that's right,
in college, that wasn't something facing young people like me. But the other part of it too is I think that's, taking a real deficit perspective too. And again, going back to my own experience, 20, 25 years ago in college, we weren't talking about mental health as openly. And if you had real struggles and you had to go get some supports and resources, that was a stigma. That was not something that you really wanted to share openly. And I think when we think about young people advocating for their mental health needs, when we see this being recognized, when we see this as a crisis, there are the factors that are going that are different, that are feeding into that. But then there's also, we got to see that as this is a strength, that, that we have this opportunity to really support them because we can talk about it more, because people are more open to it.
Dr. Walter, I see your mind. Yeah, I see your mind turning as he was talking about that.
Lots of thoughts. So let me see where I have 3 strands of thought in my head at least. So I'll kind of start in the middle. It's a very 20th century dated perspective. We've got to grow as leaders. We've got to grow as educators. If you're any type of professional, I'm a pastor and a lawyer. And part of being a pastor, part of being a lawyer, part of being a professional is I continue to cultivate my learning about my profession. Same thing in education. And so you got to grow and meet people where they are if you're a professional. 1, 2, it is incomplete in its analysis to impose all of the responsibility for delivering on the students, because it doesn't take into account the system at all. And the system's contributions to equity gaps. And so that's a big challenge. Often, even the most well-intended spend so much time talking about grit and resilience and, the students, and that all is very real. But especially here in Milwaukee, maybe in the Midwest, if you say, okay, well, what about the system? What about the organization? What in the organizational cultures is a hindrance? And if you're a 21st century leader, if you're leading with excellence, you'll respond to those questions because you always want to improve. But if you're defensive or dated, and you'll push it back on those on the students. The last thing is an article. I do a little bit of stuff around mental health. Been just kind of working in that terrain for about a decade on some things. And there's an article, it's no magic I'm getting ready to say, but I highlighted that came out a couple years ago out of a Canadian periodical. And the title said, it said, self-care is not enough. Community care is needed. And the premise of the article was that it is you can tell me to take care of myself and to look out for myself as an individual. But if the community, whether it's a church community or the school community, does not support and affirm that value, you're actually just imposing harm on me because you're asking me to do something that the community culture really doesn't support. And I appreciate that a lot because we talk about that and tell people to take care of themselves. But what is the leadership culture? Does it support that? Does the organizational culture support that? And if not, then you're imposing on the individual a heavy burden that the organizational culture really doesn't support. And so those are my thoughts about about the question that you raised. It's like I said, I'm a pastor too, and I had this conversation recently in the church. It's kind of lazy just to say, well, those kids need to do better and they just need to toughen up, even if they do. Even if they do need to toughen up, even if they do need more resilience or grit, it's also a shirking of responsibility just to say those darn kids. It's lazy at best.
I love the way that you both think about this because a lot of this deals with how I also view youth and leadership. And one of the things that I'm really pushing right now is this whole concept of radical empathy. It's the actionable empathy that we use in order for us to make a difference in the person's life, right? Empathy allows us to understand, to imagine how the person feels. But I always ask the question of radical empathy, which is what do we do once we have now stepped outside of their shoes and now we are inside in our shoes? What is it that we are now doing to make a difference? What role do you feel like empathy plays in the work that the Blessed Hub is doing? What role do you feel as though empathy may be able to play to make a bigger difference in how our communities or people view certain communities that have been going through hardships like this? Because, I mean, just hearing Milwaukee being 50 of 50, and I have a friend also that used to grow up in Milwaukee as well, a Latino friend, and he talked to me about some of the struggles that went through it, but I never really saw how bad it was until I actually started speaking to you all and learning more about the data points. So how much is a role of empathy with the work that is being done?
I'll go. Yeah, that's a very fascinating question. It's interesting. That's a very cultural question, and I don't mean black or white or anything, because I don't know which cultures are. But I come from a servant leader culture, and so understanding and listening and discerning where somebody's coming from that I'm serving is so fundamental. I almost don't even need to ask the question. People that serve other people with excellence have to hear from those people, whether you're, in my view, whether you're in the medical profession or, like I said, a pastor or in education. I just don't know how you can do it if you're not listening and understanding and getting a sense for what people are experiencing. And so, one, and then two, I know for other cultures, whether it's a business culture or something else, that is counterculture. Don't worry about what people think or feel. Here's the rules. Here's the regimen. Follow the rules, regimen, guideline, and that's it. And I think that's actually has us where we are, especially in Milwaukee. I'll add a third thing. My anecdotally, my work with larger bureaucratic organizations that are open access, that serve people, is that those organizations do not do a great job of hearing from the people that they serve.
Mm.
Now, business wouldn't do that. Business would say that's so fundamental for my marketing and my profitability is to understand who I'm serving. And so that's a challenge. It's a challenge, but it's also a necessity. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just jump on with, again, I can't get out of my psychologist lens sometimes. And, there was a big movement in psychology, gosh, maybe like 5, 6 years ago with a book by the psychologist named Paul Bloom that was against empathy, right? And he was trying to say that what happens sometimes with empathy basically is that we we think we're getting in the shoes, or we're moved by stories and emotion, but in ways that are actually not effective. And when I think about that, what you're saying, I love the radical idea, right? Because what we're saying is, it's not us sitting here hearing some story of someone, halfway across the world in some, terrible situation, which is rightfully terrible, right? And then sending some money because we're trying to, help. And that's what he's like getting at, that kind of empathy. What we're talking about, and I think what you're talking about, and I really appreciate, is it's about really sitting with people, being with them, accompanying them, but then also with this thought action, right? Like what can we do together to change the things we're seeing that are wrong, right? And so, I really love, and I've mentioned this before, but we got some really great strength in Milwaukee around capturing youth perspective, voice, elevating them. We got Milwaukee Succeeds, we have Data You Can Use, and some other folks that we're trying to help work with. And it's a real framework of, let's get young people front and center in making this change, and let's actually listen to them. And so, it's an empathy into action, and one that's really about being with, rather than just kind of sitting here being moved emotionally and, trying to offload that in some way, or just going, oh, how terrible.
I love the perspectives because it helps us to understand where we are, right, and how it'll allow us to be able to move forward. And the way that you all talk about how there's a strong emphasis on the youth voices, that to me shows how powerful your organization is. I've seen so many organizations that speak about the people that they serve, and yet they miss having the people that they serve on very imperative decisions, on vocal choices, on issues that actually matter, because at the end of the day, they go and revert back to what they think is best. And a lot of times we might think that something is best, but if we haven't taken the time to actually listen, we won't actually know how to serve that person. And we say, for instance, I might say, man, I really want to serve this person to give them food. It's a very smaller example, but I really want to give them food. But that person is, and I make them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but that person is allergic to peanuts, ends up hurting them more than it serves them, right? And so it's so crucial that we have the voices that want to make a difference, but also we're listening as intently to what they're doing. I'm looking at one of the data points, and I really want to talk about this. I want to understand some of the, and right now I'm looking at the takeaways from some of the projects, and one of the takeaways that really not I don't know if it turned my wheels, but it just made me question, what is it exactly that makes this happen. It says that higher education pipeline shows improvement for Hispanic students, but not so much not for Black students. Do we know what the cause is behind that? And do we know what is the, I guess, the work that's being done to improve that as well?
Brian, it's interesting you bring that up, because when I go back to what Walter was talking about with the Black Wellbeing Index in Milwaukee, there's a paired one that's the Hispanic Wellbeing Index.
Okay.
And the honest truth is, they're not doing much better on that, right? We're doing maybe a little bit. We're in kind of I think it's the mid 40s, right? If I have it right in a lot of these metrics. And overall, I think it's somewhere in there. So you're not doing well on either front. I do think that when it comes to education, one of the dynamics, right, is Milwaukee is a city that is imbued with, on some scale, like a micro example of like some of the macro racial issues historically and recently that we've had in our country. And what I really see playing out, and I'll be honest that there's, this is a little bit sort of like what I've seen rather than clear data.
Sure.
But is that there's narratives around young Latinx students that can generate more finances and resources and are feeding into schools that are more well-resourced and financed. And so you've got a lot of wealthy white people, because the established wealthy people in Milwaukee tend to be white because of these historical racial dynamics. And, they're philanthropists and they want to give to education. And they look at a school on the north side that maybe they're looking at metrics that, are typically kind of used. And generally, when you think of the narratives that there tend to be around Black people in Milwaukee, and they're not excited about giving their money there, right? Then they look at some of the schools on the south side, and this speaks to, some of the administrators and some of the maybe marketers of these schools too. But they see, metrics that look better. They see dynamic things happening, and they don't see sort of as long a history. They see, some of these students are newly moved in, or their families are new to the country, to Milwaukee. And I think it generates more resources, to be honest. So to kind of capture it, maybe a sense of kind of that the Latino community is felt from sort of a resource stance, is maybe a little more fresh, maybe a little more like potential. Whereas, the issues that young Black people have been facing in Milwaukee have been stagnant for a while. And again, that's on us, right? That's not on them, that's on us, but it doesn't generate then the same kind of resources, innovation, excitement that can feed into some of these outcomes.
You both have talked about this. It's on us mindset, and personally, it's something that I truly believe more and more as I become older in my life. I've thought myself to be youth for too long now. I'm 33. I might as well just admit that I'm an adult. And the thing is this: it's like I step back and I look at the work that was being done for years for youth development, and now I really see how imperative it was for the adults in the lives of those youth to make that difference. Because, like, for instance, one of the things that I talk to parents about, or excuse me, teachers about, if I ever do a PD or if I ever do anything of that nature, I always tell them that you're not fighting parents right now. You're fighting their history. You're fighting what they went through, their experiences, and a lot of that is the reason why we see the way that they act towards certain educators today. But at the end of the day, it's still our duty to make that shift in how education used to be, because a lot of parents sometimes they're wondering, what difference was education before to what we're wanting to see now. And so I love that you all are using this. What is it that we as adults have to start saying, we're going to carry this type of torch? What do we have to start doing? If there were certain things that we can say, like practical elements to say, hey, this is what I can do now. This is what I should be able to do with my students at home, with my schools. What are the shifts that are necessary to make this happen?
The couple of things. One, I don't know if this was originally Dr. King's or somebody's long before him. I've heard it attributed to Dr. King. But the idea or the truth that budgets are moral documents. Budgets reflect values and morality. And so what level of commitment?
That's powerful.
What level of budgetary commitment are institutions making towards this most challenging of data? Milwaukee, unfortunately, has a history of not making investments commensurate with the challenge or the crisis situation. So that's one. So, for example, here in Milwaukee, we've got a marvelous department that's one of our collaborators and partners, the Milwaukee Public Schools Black and Latino Male Achievement Department. That's about 6 years old, does dynamic work, has great pedagogy, touches the ground, touches a number of schools, but their budgets continue to decline and shrink for no good reason. They're doing good work. It just at just the time when we ought to be making that investment, the school system, the current leadership is backtracking. and that's a significant problem. Conversely, so we are a backbone for my brother's keeper here in Milwaukee, the Obama Foundation project, and there are 4 cities in the nation that are model cities because they've been able to move population level data. One of those cities is Yonkers, New York. Their public K through 12 school system, working together collaboratively with great intentionality, they graduate students of color at 91%. 91% of their students of color graduate, and so they're an MBK model city. And part of the reason it happens is because they work together more effectively and they invest where they want to make change. That is not the case here, and that's a significant problem. Challenge that is surmountable, but it is definitely a challenge. So there are some sets of best practices. There are some data points that we can manage towards: closing dropout rates, increasing graduation rates. There's some students who have dropped off the face since the pandemic, but we know some practices that can affect that, where those students can be reached out to. So it's doable. Intentionality plus budget plus perseverance.
I'm gonna touch on something real quick because you said something that I think is very important, and
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, you talked about how a lot of the collaborative work is being done within the city of Yonkers. That the community is very strong-willed together to make that type of difference. One of the things that is on your reports, it talks about how representation matters, but it's lacking,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering how much are people really investing in the projects that have been done. So individuals who may have been, and I want to be very careful with this question because sometimes we say, oh, as soon as you make it, you have to be putting money, all the money that you, or not all the money, but you put in a lot of money back into your community and such, which I do think is important. But is it their responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the city in general? Right? Like I'm looking at it in a dualistic way because as much as representation matters, there's also, as you mentioned, why is investments not being done or be pulled from programs that are actually working? So where is it that the represent? I'll stick to the representation question. Where is it that the representation should be, or how much more is needed for these kids to see proper models of individuals who have made it well and can be the role models for those future of the youth?
Brian, your question to me is, I think, perfect for the Milwaukee context right now. And what I mean by that is, we right now have a black mayor, Chevy Cavalier Johnson, and we have a black county
Okay.
executive, David Crowley, and they both grew up in Milwaukee, in the city, in areas where, if you look statistically about them and all the kids growing up around them, they were not going to reach where they're going, right? Like statistically, like most of their peers did not. I've seen them talk in different settings. I've seen them talk in the Community Reintegration Center, which is a Milwaukee County jail, with no media around, right? To some folks inside saying, I could have been in your shoes, right? And in many ways, the system, set up for me to be. But, so on one hand, like, that representation matters, right? It really does matter. It matters to how they speak to their story and their experience. But that's not going to change, what kid who's in high school graduating is not going to change him having the right supports and resources to feel like he can thrive in college and whatever's next, get a good job, right? There needs to be resources. There needs to be other things that go with that. And so it's kind of a both and I think the power of their stories is a power for narrative change, contributing to that. It's a power for changing psychological outlooks, right? If you're a young Black person right now in Milwaukee and you see this, you say, these are people, this is a real possibility. It opens up that kind of imagination, I think, a little bit more. But then we got to be doing the resource part. And one of the struggles there in Milwaukee is that we are in a state that likes to defund Milwaukee and then hold up Milwaukee's struggles because of the defunding as rationale for that it doesn't deserve more support and resources because it serves, folks who are in other areas and with other politics. And I think that's a real problem. Now, that's not, to excuse that we locally also need to be thinking about how we're using the resources and, giving more to young people. And so I think there's a lot of things going on there. But that's one of those challenges is we need to be able to leverage resources locally without considering state support, and not only not considering state support, but really a state policy context and funding context where I think they're actually trying to undermine the types of work that's going on.
Got a colleague out of Michigan, John Austin, and we had talked about this article, and he finished it. I literally just came across my desk. Midwest Achilles heel, race crimps region's economic growth. And that's a reality. So I was just looking at that because I was thinking about our context. And so the context in the Midwest is, race. And the organization I'm leading, ALEM, the African American Leadership Alliance, Milwaukee, we are actually in partnership, and Gabe is part of this work also with the Hispanic Collaborative of Greater Milwaukee on a project relative to race. And the framework that we're looking at, Brian, is a 3-part framework. One has to do with representation. The second has to do with power. And the third has to do with policy. And so I'll approach it that way and say representation is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle when we're trying to undo decades of systemic challenge, oppression, racism, etc. And so the framework we're looking at is representation, policy, and power. So you can have, and so Gabe just gave a great example. We have representation with the mayor and the county executive, and they're moving in savvy ways, but we did not have the power to influence policies in a significant way from the state. The state has, for years, really decades, been diminishing shared revenue, sending money back to the city when the city of Milwaukee is really the heart of Wisconsin. It really generates the most significant dollars for the economy, but shared revenue dollars coming back have been shrinking for decades. And that's a pure political anti-Milwaukee framework that is beyond representation. You've got to have some representation. You have to be able to exercise some power. And also to effectively move policy. So the representation is real. It's both substantive and symbolic, and both are important. But, even as Dr. King, since I evoked him once, I'll evoke him twice, was at the twilight of his career, he was talking about representation and also talking about economics and the power of economics. And so
That's right.
We have complex challenges, and we need to deal with the complexity with complex solutions. But a representation is important. It's significant. It's real. Happy to have the mayor. Happy to have the county executive. They're doing great work, but they've inherited some significantly and challenging situations. They've inherited, that we're not starting from neutral. We're not at zero. We're starting behind the number line. And so It requires more than representation. The physics, the science of it, the math says we're going to need more to make change.
I love the fact that you brought up the economic struggles and points of views from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because a lot of times individuals don't really know his viewpoints on economics. Mm-hmm. And they love to talk about, I have a dream, but they don't ever talk about his communal efforts and economic plans. I think that I personally, I could be wrong, but were possibly one of the main reasons would cause his assassination. But again, I love the fact that that's being talked about because, again, as representation matters, there needs to be a lot more. I can't just see what you say. The resources need to also speak to my growth and to my success. What is it that we as listeners, people in Milwaukee right now, people from out of Milwaukee, out of the state of Wisconsin, whatever the case may be, what is it that we need to possibly do with all the research that Bless Hub has founded for us to know, and where we are right now within the city, what do we need to do to start making that certain changes within our youth, within the systems, within the educational constructs that have, in a sense, held back some of the youth and the communities for a while? What are the next steps that we need to take?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I was going to say go to our website and donate to ALEM, so you can definitely do that. And I'm
No,
joking.
please. No, no, that's not a joke. I was gonna plug you guys in at the end of this anyway.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, good.
Yeah,
Plug away.
absolutely. So please plug it in. Plug
Yeah.
it in.
Yeah. Plug. Yeah. AALAM, AALA Milwaukee.org, African American Leadership Alliance Milwaukee. And it was the vision of the organization is to make Milwaukee a global destination for African Americans to thrive and prosper. And one of the keys is that we really are a network or a hub organization. So it's great that we're talking about the Blessed Hub, and we're also talking about ALEM as a hub, because in order for us to exercise power to make a difference, you have a couple of resources. You have money resources, you have people resources, and you have information resources. And our ability to organize critical masses of like-minded individuals and institutions is where we influence and exercise power. Especially when I'm going to go back to Yonkers for a minute. Yonkers was able to move their K through 12 system because they had a critical mass of people who were on the same page, moving in the same direction. In segregated cities, like those in this Rust Belt area, that takes longer because the cities are segregated and siloed, and there's less history and habits of working together. I don't want to oversimplify it either, but I have found that where people organize together effectively, there's some policy change that can be had, and we are at the center of some of that work, and that is our goal. We have a big vision. We are not trying to replicate anything. So if there's something that's working well, we support that work and amplify that work and push that work. So we're really trying to organize people who are like-minded. And there are many, by the way. Milwaukee is rich in talent and opportunity, cross-cultural gifts. We just have this long history of segregation. And so it takes us longer to get together on the same page. But when we do, we're very, very powerful. I fully expect us to move the needle over the next 5 years. There's a couple of key levers in the index that you have, and we have the 2024 index coming out soon. Regrettably, we're still on the bottom. We're still 50 out of 50. But a couple of the key levers that are talked about are elevating Black leadership, one, and then the thing that we talk about most on this podcast is improving educational outcomes. And so that's doable. We've seen other cities do it, closing the dropout rate, increasing the graduation rates. You know, if we can do those two things, then, and there are others, but since we're focused on the hub, we can do that. And when you look at the hub and the organizations engaged, those directly with education, those that are close to education, it's a large number. If we get effectively organized, when we get effectively organized, we'll make a difference.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think, that last part, is totally right. It's about organizing to the strengths, right? One of the things we've been trying to do from the beginning is not reinvent the wheel and not say that we got to figure it out, right? But rather say, hey, look at all these good things doing. How can we synergize this rather than operating silos or rather than competing against each other? And the other part to that is I think there needs to be, broadly, just a lot of open listening, right? A lot of open listening to youth in a really authentic way. And what's going to come with some of that is a different vision of healing, and different vision of hope in that sense too. I'm kind of immersed in the restorative justice world with some of the research and work I do. And, I think we need to do that with our youth. We need to do that with our city. We need to do that with each other, right? We really need to come together, listen and hear each other from this perspective of there are things we need to heal together and we need to work towards. And I think that can be in any context, right? And that's, when I see it in schools, restorative justice is hard because you're asking teachers and administrators to sit there and be on the level with youth. And I think that same thing we got to do out broadly. We got to challenge ourselves to say, we're going to sit here with these 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and we're going to treat them as equals. We're going to hear them, listen to them, and then we're going to work together. Maybe we're going to have a different level of power. Maybe we have a different level of resources that we can harness to that effort. But the listening and the sort of healing and the working together has got to happen as equals.
Love that. Dr. Walter, Gabriel, I just really want to thank you so much for both coming on to our podcast, being able to really focus in on the developments that are happening within Milwaukee, the program that you all have created, and the work that's being done. It's not easy work, to say the least, but it is very effective and impactful work that a lot of our youth need. And I'm glad to see that there are people who have the right mindset behind the work that needs to be done. So thank you both so much, not just for coming onto this podcast, but for the work that you're doing and the great impact that is making within our young people in society. I just want to make sure, just for our listeners, if there's a place for them to be able to find you, to donate, to help, to work with, whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that all of that information is out there as well. So if there's any information on that, please feel free to share at this point.
Yes. Brian, you can go to our website and become another one of our individual donors. Go to
Let's do it.
ALAM, AALAM, ILWAUKE. So it's ALAMMilwaukee.org, or just Google African American Leadership Milwaukee. We'll always be the one that comes up first.
Good one. Okay.
Go to the page, donate. Every amount is appreciated. I really actually would like to see a lot of individual donors. And the reason I would take big donors too, but is because it is really going to take a collective investment. If and as we do that, that will make a difference. When we have enough a critical mass of people invested with time and talent and treasure, it'll make a difference. And one of the ways to do that, to show our power really, is to say, hey, we have all of these individuals who are invested in this mission and vision of making Milwaukee a global destination for African Americans to thrive and prosper. They believe in leaders. They believe in this power representation and policy, and they are standing with us, because that is what moves, especially here, moves things, is people standing together, moves policy, moves power, moves budgets. And so, yeah, please go to Google Milwaukee African American Leadership. Our page will come up first, and the donate button is right on the page.
So, Brian, one of the benefits of being in an institution of higher education is I don't have to ask you to donate to us. We have that stability, that rooting in Marquette. What I will ask folks, besides donating to ALAM to support, is to reach out. Anything that has generated an interest, a question, even a pushback. I really, in leading this kind of effort with Blessed Hub, I really try to encourage folks, like, tell us where we're wrong, tell us what we're missing. Whether you be locally in Milwaukee or maybe you're somewhere else and you're like, hey, some of what you said resonates, but I really think you didn't do this part right, or I challenge you on that. And so I'm always open by email, probably on it too much. And mine is just my name, which is Gabriel, Gabriel, and then .Velez, which is V as in Victor, ELEZ, at marquette.edu. But always happy to connect with folks, always happy to share. That's how we got connected, Brian, and now we're here. And I'm really feeling thankful to be on this podcast, to be able to have shared with you. And I'm always inspired when I hear Walter too. So I'm ready to go out and fight some more of the good fight this week.
Let's do it. That's real. So there you have it, folks. You could donate your money. You could donate your voice as well to be able to speak and figure out ways to connect. Because at the end of the day, even as you said, even if there is an oppositional focus, let's talk. Let's sit down at the table to figure out the proper solutions that are necessary in order for us to see the impacts that we want to see within our cities, within our youth, and building up our people. So thank you so much again, both Dr. Walter and Gabriel. Thank you for coming on to our podcast, and continue to do the great work that you do.
Awesome.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of BSL Speaks podcast. Your dedication to this journey is greatly appreciated, and I invite you to continue this journey with us on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and many other podcast sites. Simply search for BSL Speaks to subscribe and stay updated on all our latest episodes, resources, and programs. Your support means the world to us, and we're excited to have you join our community. Stay inspired, stay empowered, and keep engineering impact in all that you do. Until next time.